Lucía was not a woman of great stature, luxuries, neither extravagances. His world was spinning in around her sewing workshop, a space modest but warm in the heart of the Chambéry neighborhood, where the fabrics hung as curtains of hope and the threads were resting in drawers, arranged with care. With their hair always collected in a bun undone and his glasses hanging from the neck, she spent her mornings between patterns, scissors and sewing. She was known by his precision, its patience, and for so more than dresses. Many of her clients, they swore that in each stitch there was a piece of soul. At home, the honey was simple but intense. Esteban, his husband, wore years working as commercial, and it seemed to have found stability, while the little Nico filled with laughter the corners with its curiosity inexhaustible. It seemed a normal family, happy, but what seemed solid, sometimes, is just a mirage. The first one's signs that something was wrong arrived as small discomfort, easy to ignore. Esteban began to have urgent trips to Valladolid, always from one day to the next, without many explanations. At first, Lucía thought it was a work thing, that perhaps the company was passing by changes. But then came the absences in dates important, the calls that ended abruptly, the phone that was never left unlocked, and that looked dodgy each time I asked something else beyond the everyday. Lucía was not a woman distrustful, but she wasn't stupid either. And although her heart screamed at him that something was wrong, the routine, the love and the fear of destroying what had been built kept it in silence. Until one afternoon, while fixed he hem of a wedding dress, received a call I would make tremble the foundations of its world. Marcella, her friend since the years of school, he didn't speak in circles. Lucía, I just saw to Esteban in an Instagram post. It is in a bachelor party, and it's not yours. The wedding is this Saturday in the Cathedral of Valladolid, and the bride is called Lorena de la Vega. The silence that followed, it was long and brutal. Lucía felt as the air was escaping from him. Like each word would have, it was a sharp blow in his chest. He didn't cry, he didn't scream. He stayed sitting, with the needle still in the hand, like, his body resisted to accept what your ears had listened. Then he looked at Nico, who was napping in his workshop sofa, with its little hand holding a rag doll made by she same. And there he understood everything. I couldn't allow your son grew in the middle of a lie. It was not about recovering to Esteban, nor to crawl by explanations. It was for Nico, for her, for the truth. That same one night, with the heart-made pieces but dry eyes, Lucía prepared a small suitcase with clothes for her and her son. He also kept a copy of your marriage certificate, Nico's birth certificate, and a folder with photos relatives. I didn't know exactly. That would do upon arrival, but I felt that I should be there, in that wedding in front of everyone. Not because spectacle, but by justice. He bought 2 train tickets for the morning next and wrote a note he left on the dining room table. Esteban, I know everything. Saturday us we see in Valladolid. He did not sign. He did not insult. He did not ask explanations. He only left that phrase as a promise. In the morning next, while he train headed north, Lucía, holding Nico against her chest, trying not to tremble. Outside, the landscape changed, but inside her something deeper was beginning to transform. Snap History Tea played. Subscribe to the channel so we can continue sharing them. Really, that changes everything. The trip to Valladolid was silent. Nico slept most of the time, oblivious to the storm, emotional shock that shook her mother. Lucía looked through the train window, watching the fields pass as a silent film. In its mind, reviewed each conversation, each Esteban's gesture in the recent months, searching signs that he didn't want to see before. Betrayal. It hurt. But what devastated her most was the double life, the farce, prolonged. How much time was wearing planning that wedding? Who further did you know? How could someone share bed with a woman and at the same time promise him he future to another? I didn't have answers, and perhaps I wouldn't find them never. But I had a certainty. I would not allow history to be rewritten without it. When his train arrived at the station, the air cold hit her in the face. He squeezed his hand son with strength and walked determined, like who has nothing to lose and still so walk upright. The days before the wedding were confusing. Lucía didn't know anyone in Valladolid, so he rented a small room in a modest guest house near the center. I spent the hours strolling with Nico through quiet squares and searching on the internet about the event. The wedding was announced in the Circle Social, further exclusive in the city. Lorena de la Vega was the daughter of a powerful businessman, and the marriage promised to be the event of the year. Lucía found even an interview of the couple in a local magazine, where Esteban appeared smiling, saying that he had found the true love of his life. He felt nausea, but he didn't cry. In his place, ironed carefully, he dressed further sober that he had, and also prepared a small one for Nico. Blue sailor with collar white. If they went to face the world, they would do it with their heads held high and their clothes flawless, because they weren't going to beg. They were going to exist. Saturday morning arrived with a clear sky and silence strange. Lucía woke up early. She patiently prepared Nico and helped him have breakfast on the small table in the room. He didn't explain where to were going exactly. He just told her that they were going to see her dad. Nico, innocent, was happy. Dressed in his little suit blue, it seemed straight out of an old postcard. Lucía looked at herself in a mirror before leaving. It was not a woman who would attract attention, but that tomorrow his eyes were loaded with a force unusual. It was collected his hair, put on a beige coat, and stored the documents in his bag. He walked with a firm step to the cathedral, mingling with the curious people who were already gathering at the entrance. No one recognized her. To everyone, she was just a Moor. But for inside, every step was an act of resistance, every breath a declaration of existence. When the bells began to ring, Lucía made her way through the crowd, guests who already filled the cathedral pews. He didn't stop. He didn't ask permission. He advanced by the central aisle with Nico in arms, just when the priest asked the bride and groom to seal his commitment with a kiss. The music stopped suddenly. All the faces turned toward her. Some looked at her with disdain, others with confusion, and some, how many already, they took out their mobile phones to record. Esteban in the altar was left pale. Lucía reached the forehead, took out of the bag his folder, and held it out loud. "I am this man's wife," she said in a voice firm, "and he is the father of my child." A murmur he toured the church like an earthquake. Lorena let go his bouquet. The priest, he stepped back, and Stephen looked down, defeated. In the silence inside the cathedral, it became suffocating. Nobody knew as react. Lucía, in change, remained upright, with the heart beating like a drum, but with the voice firm. He handed the priest the folder with the documents. The marriage certificate, dated toward more than 7 years. Nico's birth certificate, with the Stephen's name as father, and several photographs relatives. The priest, visibly uncomfortable, he read in silence the papers, while the congregation contained breath. Lorena, paralyzed, barely could pronounce "Is this it true?" which was barely heard. Esteban didn't respond. He just looked at Lucía like, "Yeah, I saw a ghost." And in a way, that's how it was. There was buried to that woman under the lie. There was tried delete it, but she was there real, with evidence, with dignity, and with the child that he there was abandoned to dress as a groom with another. What happened after was a chain of reactions impossible to stop. Lorena, humiliated and in tears in the eyes, abandoned the altar escorted by his mother. Some guests they left hurried, others followed recording openly. The priest, not knowing what do, finished suspending the ceremony. Stephen, for his part, could not continue holding on standing. He left fall in one of the banks, defeated by the evidence. Lucía did not say more. "I didn't do missing. Your presence, your firmness, your silence even. They spoke more than any speech." He turned around, kissed Nico's forehead, and left by where there was entered. Outside, the sun shone brightly, like Yehi Universe applauded in silence what had just happened. Some journalists, they were already approaching, cameras in hand, but Lucía didn't stop. She walked slowly, breathing deeply. That day, she hadn't just breaking a wedding. There was recovered his voice. The news was not long in coming in spread. In less than an hour, videos of the outage were circulating by all social networks, and the Stevens name became trend. Some local media began searching for Lucía, but she avoided any contact. I didn't want revenge media, neither prominence. I just wanted close a cycle and return to start. At the boarding house, Nico played with some pieces of wood, oblivious to the spinning digital chaos in around his family. Lucía watched him from the bed, with a mixture of pride and sadness. There was done the right thing, but he cost emotional was high. I was tired, empty, but also in peace. For the first time for months, I didn't feel like I was alive. A lie. That night, he turned off his phone and hugged her son with strength. They did not know exactly that would come later, but they would face it together. Because now, finally, the truth was on the table. Upon returning to Madrid, his routine was never the same. His workshop, which had previously been just a workspace, began to receive visits unexpected. Women who had seen the video arrived looking for more than just dresses. They wanted to talk to Lucía, get to know her, tell her your own stories of betrayal and rebirth. At first, it made him uncomfortable, that attention, but soon understood that his experience there was touched fibers deep. He began to receive orders personalized, not only by his talent as seamstress, but for what it represented. Every dress she created was wearing now a symbolic value. It was like, yes, with each stitch, it will help to other woman to recover his own voice. So was born he named that most. It would be late again his stamp, Lucía Fuerte. It was not a marketing strategy, it was a statement. A way of saying that even though he was broken the soul, they never could destroy. The impact of your history was growing little by little, like an expanding wave in the water. What began as a personal catharsis was transformed in one movement, discreet but powerful. Lucía began to be invited to design fairs, first as an exhibitor and then as lecturer. Although at first it was difficult for him to talk in public, with the time learned to share his history without resentment, focusing in what came after the betrayal, rebuilding, resilience, self-love. His workshop was no longer just a workplace, but a space where others women, they found containment. Sometimes they didn't do it orders. They just came to have a cup of tea, to share a silence, to feel seen. Lucía, with her style serene and his look firm, he had converted in a kind of unintentional reference. And although sometimes he passed it hurt, already did not define it. One day, while ended the embroidery on a wedding dress, ironically, one of her works further requested, received a visit unexpected, Lorena de la Vega. She entered unannounced, with the expression difficult to read. Lucía left a thread on the table and looked at her in silence. There was none strain, neither hostility, only two women who had been part of a same lie, faced face to face. Lorena asked apologies, not with rehearsed words, not even with tears dramatic, but with a sincerity that disarmed Lucía. She confessed that she knew nothing, that Esteban had hidden everything that had been since ridiculous, exposed, deceived. But she also thanked him, because thanks to that interruption, there had not been married to a man who would have destroyed. Lucía listened to her in silence. I didn't need forgive, but neither hate. He offered her a tea, and without saying a lot more, shared that moment like two women who in different ways, there were been wounds, and there were survived. After that meeting Lorena, Lucía felt something inside her loosen, as if, finally, she could close that chapter with a feeling of relief in place of rage. They weren't friends, nor would they be, but neither enemies. They had been pieces of a same lie, but now I had the opportunity to write his history from scratch. With the time, Lucía stopped looking toward back. I no longer checked photos, ancient, not even asking in that moment change everything. There was accepted that some questions would not have answer, and that was fine. He concentrated in his workshop, in his son, in his clients, in his new life. She smiled again without guilt, enjoying the simple days. She learned to dance with Nico in the living room, to sing while I sewed, to sleep without anxiety. And about everything, he learned to look at himself in the mirror without feeling that he was missing something. It was on one of those quiet days that she met Daniel, a discreet man with a paused and gaze honest, who came to the workshop to pick up a dress that her mother had managed her. The first thing Lucía noticed was that he didn't ask too much, nor did he show any curiosity about his fame sudden. He spoke respectfully, unhurriedly, and smiled with a sweetness that I was not looking for impress. Nico, by his part, he immediately became attached. Every time Daniel came to the workshop, the child ran to greet him with enthusiasm, and he always brought a cookie, a book, or a story to share. Lucía at first saw it as a coincidence friendly, but with the time it was discovering that this presence constant, without pressure, without games, it began to fill spaces that she had given up lost, and without realizing it account, was found waiting for your visits as who wait a truce in the middle of the day. Daniel did not do promises. He didn't say phrases grandiloquent, neither tried conquer with speeches. I was just there. I listened. I helped. I shared silences without discomfort and looked at Lucía as if, yeah, I already knew her since before, as yeah knew what it cost trust again. It was a slow process, with no shortcuts. Lucía didn't have intentions of falling in love, and he had no intentions hurry. But day after day, gesture after gesture, was leaving footprints small but deep in his everyday life. One afternoon rainy, while they repaired together a chair rattan in the workshop, their hands touched by accident. There was no strain, neither startled, just one smile, shy, and a soft phrase. It seems that this chair doesn't want to give up, just like you. Lucía looked at him in surprise, and for first time in a lot time, let his guard down. It wasn't the love in a movie. It was something better, real, calm, honest. Meanwhile, his workshop continued growing. There was gone from being a sewing space to a small, well-known atelier with orders from different parts of the country. Lucía's story had become converted in symbol of overcoming, and that was reflected in his work. Each design had a narrative, a purpose, a woman behind. He began to form a team of other seamstresses, many of them single mothers, women older people without opportunities, or young people who had abandoned his studies. He taught them patiently, shared his techniques, and offered them a place where they could not only work, but also heal. The atmosphere was warm, filled with soft music, conversation sincere, and laughter spontaneous. Lucía had created a refuge, not only for her, but for many others who also came running away from the pain, and there was made without giving up his essence. Strong, discreet, and deeply human. One summer afternoon, while I was ironing a lace veil for a client who was getting married in Galicia, Lucía heard Nico ask, quite naturally, "Mom, can Daniel come? I come live with us." The question took her by surprise, not because of what it meant, but because of how serene he sounded in the voice of his son. He bent down to his level and stroked him hair. I would like that," he asked. Nico nodded without hesitation. "Yes, because when he is, you smile more." Lucía felt a lump in the throat. He did not respond at that time, but that night, while folded fabrics in silence, he thought in how much there was changed from that interrupted wedding. It was no longer a woman who was waiting explanations, now built elegy, and if decided open the door for him to someone more, it would be from freedom, not from lack. Maybe Nico had reason. Maybe it was time to open not only the workshop, but also his house and his heart. It was then when he spoke to Daniel, without beating around the bush, like always. In a hike, peaceful by Park, while Nico was running behind a comet, told him that he didn't know what was coming, but that he was willing to try. Daniel looked at her with the same calm that always took his hand and replied, "I have nothing to demand, just a lot to take care of." It was the beginning of a new stage, not a fairy tale, but yes, of respect mutual, of tenderness conscious. Daniel began to spend more time with them, helping at home, playing, with Nico, fixing things in the workshop. Never tried occupy he no one's place, just build your own. And Lucía, with each little gesture, confirmed that there was made the decision correct. I didn't need to be rescued. I just wanted walk accompanied. As the months passed, Lucía's life was acquiring a stability that I did not know from toward years. It was not a perfect routine, but one that chose all the days. Your business continued growing. His son showed himself each time, further safe and happy, and the relationship with Daniel was strengthening from everyday life, cooking together, reading stories in bed, sharing his silence without this Wade. Sundays had been turned sacred, not by religion, but because of the habit of having breakfast all on the terrace, between laughter, jam homemade, and smell of fresh coffee done. In those moments, Lucía used to look at his around and feel something new. Gratitude, not for what you lost, but by everything he achieved build from that break. Because the Lucía who had disrupted a wedding with a child in arms, she was no longer the same. Now she was more firmer, freer, more mistress of herself, but not everything. It was simple. Esteban's ghost still was around from time to time when sometimes it appeared in the headlines of gossip magazines, others times in messages unexpected trying to talk or explain. Lucía, however, no longer felt that stitch in his chest when reading his name. There was learned to separate he past of the present. He didn't hate Esteban, but he didn't owe him anything either. One afternoon, he appeared at the door of the workshop without warning. It was more thin, with a look off. "I just want see my son," he said. Lucía was not upset. She asked him to wait outside. He came in and called Nico. He explained to him who was outside and asked him, wanted to see him, the boy. He thought for a moment and then said, "Yes, Mom, this with me, yes." They left together. There was no scene, there was no crying, just a brief, polite, awkward encounter, like someone no longer shares the same language. After that visit, Esteban did not return to insist. Maybe understood that there was arrived late, that the place that was lost could not be recovered with simple gestures of remorse. Nico did not ask a lot after. He just commented, with that logic childish so pure, "I don't like it when someone appears only when wants." Lucía hugged him tightly, aware that her son was learning to recognize links healthy from small. That reassured her, because what most I was afraid, since everything it exploded, was that Nico grew up with invisible wounds, dragging silences as those that she same there was loaded so many years. But seeing it firm, sure, expressing what he felt clearly, was the greatest proof that they were doing well. Daniel noticed it too, and although never he thought about Esteban that night while they washed the dishes, he told her softly, "Nico is like I had further beyond words." The atelier was consolidated with the time as a space only in Madrid. It was not the further luxurious, neither he more popular, but he further human. Women of different corners of the country, they arrived looking for something more than a dress. They wanted to be heard, accompanied, understood. Lucía had developed a kind of sixth sense for reading in the eyes of each client what she did not dare to say. Many they cried in the first appointment, others just asked for a moment in silence before trying something on, and she was there, with the patience of someone knows the pain. Every design that came out of the workshop was an act of love, a garment full of history, of empowerment. There was dresses for weddings, yes, but also for divorces, for rebirths, for closing stages. Lucía understood that dressing could also be a way of healing, and that converted his job into something else bigger than one profession. It was a mission. Do you feel something reading this? Then subscribe. It's the only way we can continue counting stories. So, one day, a journalist specialized in fashion and society asked to do a report on her. At first, Lucía hesitated. She didn't like them, the spotlights, nor the cameras. But he accepted with a condition, that there would be no talk only of the scandal of the past, but of the present, of the work he was doing, of the stories he covered. The interview was published in a circulation magazine, national, under the title, Lucía Fuerte, the woman who converted the pain in design. The photos showed his workshop full of life, with fabrics hanging, women working, children playing in a corner, and she in his center, with its linen apron and hands full of pins. The repercussion was immediate. Received messages from all over her country, of women grateful, of others who felt reflected. Even some designers recognized offered him collaborations, but Lucía didn't let herself be dazzled. He thanked all with humility, but kept firm his essence. Grow, yes, but without losing the soul. Daniel, by his part, became on a silent pillar, never occupied too much space, but was in all the moments important. He accompanied Lucía to the fairs, helped in the workshop when toward missing, picked up Nico from school, prepared dinner when she worked late, never claimed prominence. It only added up. One night, while they had dinner the three together, Nico looked at Daniel and said, "Are you my dad?" Now, the silence was immediate. Lucía held back her air. Daniel looked at him tenderly and replied, "I am someone who wants a lot, and that always goes to be here." Nico smiled, and that it was enough. It didn't do lack define in words what was already felt in the gestures. Lucía, upon hearing it, felt a deep peace. That was what always there was, dear, a family where love is not demanded, but offered. With the passage of time, that family structure is gone strengthening, without the need for labels, neither promises grandiloquent. Daniel and Lucía did not talk about marriage, but they shared a home. They didn't need titles to know that they were cared for mutually. Nico, for his part, grew happy, surrounded by love, routines healthy, and much dialogue. Sometimes asked about her past, about her biological father, and Lucía responded with the utmost honesty possible, adapting the words to your age. He didn't speak with hate, but neither he was sugarcoating the truth. He was someone who was with us for a while, but he didn't know how to stay. Nico seemed to understand, and that was enough for him. At home, there was no talk of betrayals, not of dramas, but of respect, of bonds true. Lucía had learned that the children do not need perfection, but coherence, and that was what was in the air in each corner of his home. One coherence that came from lived love, not from idealized love. The workshop was also undergoing a maturing process. What was initially a space for sewing and healing became in a project further wide. Lucía began to offer sewing workshops emotional, where women they shared stories while learned to sew their own clothes. It was the experience therapeutic, intimate, powerful. Sometimes, during a class, one of them broke in crying while held a needle, and others were approaching to hug her without saying one word. No one judged. All they knew what it was to recover from the ruins. Lucía guided gently, without imposing herself, with that natural talent for containing without invading. The media began to become interested again, but she maintained her same focus. Show he present, not living in the past. Thus, your name became symbol of something much deeper than a brand. It was synonymous with strength feminine, of reconstruction ease, of hope-made fabric. One autumn afternoon, while sweeping dry leaves from the entrance of the workshop, Lucía received a letter. It was not common in those days receive something for mail, traditional, and less with its name handwritten. She opened it with curiosity, immediately recognizing Esteban's handwriting. The envelope contained only one sheet, without any detours or excuses. Esteban asked him sorry, but not since he repentance empty, but with a clarity that Lucía did not expect. She said that there was late years in understand he damage caused, that there was tried redo his life, but that could not be achieved find peace. He recognized that he had acted by cowardice, and that he admired the fortitude with which she there was rebuilt his world. I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted thank you by to have it face that day, because thanks to that, he had also had to look in the mirror. Lucía read the letter in silence, without tears, neither rage. Then he put it away in a memory box, not out of nostalgia, but as testimony that even the errors further painful they can leave a teaching. That same one night, sitting in the living room with Daniel, he showed him the letter, not because we'll need validation, but because there was learned that sharing was also part of healing. Daniel read it, returned it without doing judgment someone, and asked him, "How do you feel?" That question simple reminded him by what had it chosen. Free, he replied her, and it was true, free of grudges, of old wives' tales, wounds, of accounts pending, free to follow growing without looking back. That conversation marked a turning point, not because would change something between them, but because reaffirmed that they were walking together from honesty purest. In a world where many relations are born from necessity or the fear, his was flourishing since the election conscious, since he deep respect. And that, for Lucía, was the true love. With the years, Lucía's atelier was evolving in a small training school. It no longer just taught sewing, but also self-esteem, leadership, and entrepreneurial skills. It incorporated talks with psychologists and counselors, financiers, and women who, like Yi, had crossed moments of breaking, and they were left further strong. Some of its ancient female students opened their own workshops in other cities, and always they spoke of Lucía as the one who taught to begin from scratch with dignity. She was not looking for recognition, but he was excited each time someone said to him, "Thank you for teaching me to believe again in me." Daniel, always at his side, accompanied her in the events. He maintained the nerves prior to each exhibition and celebrated each achievement with the same humility. And Nico, now 9 years, began to understand each time, plus the magnitude of what his mother had built with his own hands. One day, while organized a day of doors open in the atelier, a young, shyly approached Lucía with a folder of drawings. Her name was Sarah. She had 20 years old and came from a foster home. There was heard from Lucía in a chat community and dreamed of designing clothes, but never there was been able to pay a training. Lucía looked at her sketches carefully and felt something familiar in their lines. There was pain, but also beauty. Without thinking twice, she invited her to join the team as apprentice. He did it as I had made with many others, unconditionally, but with confidence. Sarah not only became in one of his best collaborators, but also in a kind of daughter chosen. With her, Lucía revived his own beginning, doubts, the fear, hope, and seeing her growing up, he understood something that he already sensed toward time. When a woman rebuilds herself, she can lift up many others with her. The media, they knocked on the door again. This time, it wasn't because he's scandal of the past, but by his social impact of the atelier. A national channel wanted to record a documentary about women who had turned your pain in project's community. Lucía, faithful to her style, accepted only if could show he real process. No retouching, no script forced. He allowed the cameras will accompany a work week in the workshop, capturing the moments every day. The sewing machine that got stuck, laughter spontaneous among students, wordless hugs, shared. Mate in he rest. When the documentary premiered, the reaction was massive. Hundreds of messages they arrived from all the corners of the country. Some they asked help, others offered collaboration. Lucía, far from being proud, organized a network of volunteers with alumni to expand his scope of the project. She understood that she couldn't do everything alone, but together they could arrive a lot further far. That visibility brought with him invitations unexpected, universities, foundations, and even organizations internationals were looking for her to share his experience. Lucía, although still did not feel a figure public, accepted some proposals, as long as they didn't push her away too much of his workshop or his people. In one of those conferences in Seville, ended his chat saying, "I am not an expert in nothing. I'm just a woman who refused to disappear." That phrase, it spread through the networks like a powerful echo and became in a motto that many, they started repeating. Even some brands, they started using it as campaign banner social. Lucía did not demand rights or look for fame. He smiled at the sight his phrase in banners, t-shirts or Instagram accounts. The important thing was the message, not the name. Because since he decided raise his voice, his cause had been always the same, reminding each one woman who still broken had value. Meanwhile, at home, life continued his course with a harmony that Lucía valued every day. It wasn't perfect. There were days of tiredness, arguments, small setbacks, normal, but it was real, chosen, built with love and patience. Daniel continued being that companion who added without invading, who was present without the need to stand out. Sometimes, Lucía would observe him from the kitchen, fixing something in the patio with Nico, and I felt a heat in his chest that did not come from memory, but from the present. Never thought he would trust again, so in someone, and yet there I was trusting not because needed, but because I wanted. I was grateful. Each gesture, each silence shared, each morning with the smell of toast and laughter of your son. In that routine, so simple as deep, there was found something else more valuable than perfection: peace. One Saturday, while organized the costumes for a parade charitable, Sarah approached Lucía with a proposal shy. I wanted to introduce his own mini collection within the event. I had fear of appearing arrogant, but I dreamed of showing what I had created. Lucía hugged her tightly. "How can you not present your work if you have done it with so much love?" He helped her to organize the details, to adjust the seams, to choose the models among themselves, students. On the day of the parade, the atelier was full. Women of all ages, they applauded, excited each exit to the footbridge improvised in the patio. When arrived, Sarah's turn, the silence fell. Her clothes. They spoke of scars, of imperfect beauty, of strength contained. When she finished, Lucía looked at her from the back of the room and made him a sign with the thumb toward up, with tears in the eyes. Not by pride. For confirmation, what there was sown continued giving fruits. After the parade, many people came to congratulate Sarah. Some, they even offered him scholarships and opportunities to continue forming. But she didn't want to leave. "This place saved me," he said in front of everyone. "I don't want to leave still. I want to continue learning here with you." Lucía was moved deeply. I knew that his atelier was not a school common. It was a space of containment, of second opportunities, of links true. I couldn't offer securities officers nor recognized diplomas, but could offer the most hard to find: trust, time, and presence. So he proposed something new, to lead a group of beginners and teach them what he had learned. Sarah enthusiastically accepted, and since then it became not only apprentice, but in teacher. That transition was magical, because in each class, in each advice, Sarah transmitted not only technique, but humanity. And Lucía, watching her, felt that something deeper was happening. An invisible chain of women healing to others, women. That same one year, Daniel proposed something unexpected. During a walk with Nico through his park, took out a small notebook where there was drawn a sketch of how imagined a new headquarters for the atelier. A space, further spacious, with sewing rooms, a garden internal, a toy library for children of the students, and even one small coffee shop. Lucía looked at him in surprise. "Have you been thinking in this?" he asked. Daniel nodded. "I don't want you to boundaries by space. Your work deserves grow without losing you essence." She took a notebook in his hands and stayed in silence for a long time. not for doubt, but by emotion. Because by first time, someone there was dreamed of his side, not by her, but with her. And that, for a woman who had had to rebuild itself, it meant he beginning of a new stage. Not one stage without challenges, but yes, with roots firm and company true. During the weeks following, the idea of the new headquarters was taking shape. Daniel, with the help of an architect friend, began working in a real project, with plans, budget, and proposals for materials. Lucía, at first, felt overwhelmed. There was learned to live with just enough to be cautious, to measure every step. But little by little, the illusion was winning space to fear. They began to visit lands, to look for financing, including to organize a support campaign among alumni and collaborators. The response was overwhelming. Many offered time, money, materials, contacts. It was about something more larger than an atelier. It was a symbol, proof that what was built with effort and truth could to hold on new foundations, more wider, more bright. Nico enthusiastically drew in his notebook as I wanted it to be the play corner, and each night Lucía slept with a mixture of exhaustion and excitement, like who is about to take a leap important. The inauguration of the new space was celebrated 1 year after. It was a cloudy day, but nobody, it seemed, noticed it. More than 100 people came. Neighbors, clients, former students, journalists, collaborators, and many women who had followed Lucía's story from a distance. And the facade was simple, white, with the name Lucía Fuerte in letters sober, surrounded by purple bougainvillea. Inside, the walls were decorated with photos of key moments: the first workshop, the Sarah's parade, the shared days in the old headquarters. Daniel and Nico cut the entrance ribbon to applause. Lucía, visibly excited, she gave a short speech. She didn't talk about Stephen or betrayal or scandals. She spoke of community, of hope, of women who rise up and rise to others. When it ended, there was a brief silence and then a long, heartfelt applause. That day, more than opening a new space, Lucía sealed it a new stage of his life. The new atelier brought with him an energy different. Although everything was more large and modern, Lucía made sure that the warmth was not lost. She continued to personally welcome new arrivals, students, prepared the coffee with his own hands, and decorated each corner with objects they had history. The toy library, designed for the children of the students, became in a space for games and stories, where Nico used to read in voice high for the further small. Sarah coordinated his sewing kit with a mixture of firmness and tenderness that made her shine. Daniel, from the background, managed the arrangements, the inputs, and any detail technician who would free up Lucía to focus in what he loved, being with his people. The structure grew, but the essence remained. And that was what made him most proud. And because it was not just about expansion, but about coherence with what had been his origin. With the time, some foundations international, they began to visit he space. They were interested replicate he Lucía's model in other cities, even in others countries. She listened attentively, gratefully, but also firmly in his posture. I didn't want to convert his history in a product. I accepted collaborations, but never traded his securities. One of those foundations proposed, create a franchise of your brand. They promised investment, visibility, and a global network. Lucía, without hesitation, replied, I don't want my name appear without a soul. That phrase went viral on social media. Like many others things that he said without searching impact, and although he did not accept the proposal, he did allowed open a mentoring space where others, women could learn his method and replicate it with your own names in their own neighborhoods. That was their way to grow, multiply without losing identity. Because more than expanding, Lucía wanted inspire. One day, during a radio interview, the host asked him that would do, could return back in he time. Lucía saved silence some seconds before answering. I wouldn't change anything. Even the most painful things brought me here. That phrase, spoken calmly, touched many. It wasn't a glorification of suffering, but an acceptance mature from the path tour. After the broadcast, arrived dozens of messages from women sharing their own stories of infidelity, abandonment, or loneliness. Some just wanted to be heard. Others they asked advice, and others simply expressed gratitude. Lucía responded all one by one, like always. It was not considered counselor, neither therapist, just one woman who had walked among ruins, and there was learned to recognize the foundation's solids. And if there was something learned on that journey, it was that each history deserves time, attention, and respect. Not all would end up with an atelier, but all could start with a here. Nico, by his part, began to go through adolescence with the same sensitivity that had it characterized from small. He liked music, he read novels, graphics, and wrote in a notebook that didn't let anyone I saw. Sometimes he locked himself away in his room by the hour, and others times I spent the whole afternoon helping to sort buttons in the workshop. Lucía watched him in silence. Respecting its times, its silences, its changes, I knew I couldn't protect him from everything, but could offer him a space where always felt sure. One night, while they washed the dishes, he told her, "Mom, when I grow up, want to do something that helps to others, like you." Lucía said nothing. She just looked at him with eyes full of pride, because further beyond everything that was built with his hands, he knew that his greatest work was that child, that young man, that noble human being who had grown among fabrics, true words, and unconditional love. In one of the many mentoring sessions, an older woman named Teresa approached Lucía with a history different. It didn't come fleeing from a betrayal recent, nor searching a new chance labor. I came to close a duel ancient. There was been seamstress in his youth, but his husband forbade her continue working. I hung up the machine the day I got married, and never I touched her again. Lucía listened to her attentively and without saying much, invited her to sit down in front of one of the workshop machines. Teresa hesitated, trembled, and finally, through tears, began to sew a hem. That moment was left recorded in the memory of all those present. Not because of the garment, but for what it meant, a woman reuniting with a part of himself that believed lost. Since then, Teresa came each week. Sometimes I sewed, sometimes I just watched, but she always left further light. And Lucía understood that sometimes healing is not about starting over, but continue from where A was interrupted. The impact emotional of those stories began to transcend even to those who did not participate directly in the workshop. They were organized samples, photographic, clothing exhibitions with stories, embroidery, series of talks where they mixed design, memory, and reconstruction. One of the exhibitions, further emotional, was called Seams That Are Not Seen, and exhibited clothes. Incomplete, accompanied by fragments of letters never sent, thoughts intimate, or childhood memories. The cultural press praised the proposal, but for Lucía, the most what was happening was important in the eyes of those who they walked through the exhibition. Tears contained, looks long, sighs that said, "It happened to me too." Because further beyond aesthetics, what your project was causing a deep connection. And in a world where so many people feel alone in his pain, that was, perhaps, the act further revolutionary of all. In the midst of all that growth, Lucía did not neglect the most important, its interior. It continued going to therapy. I wrote in a private notebook and was given pauses when the pace of the workshop overwhelmed her. Sometimes she got lost by a few hours in bookstores small. Others I was walking alone, parks with headphones on, listening music that reminded him who was before everything. There was learned that helping did not mean forget oneself, same knee, and to hold to others also required support. Daniel understood this well. He encouraged her to take breaks, to delegate, to not carry everything. Sometimes they just sat together at the end of the day without speaking, sharing a tea in silence. They were those simple moments, without speeches, neither promises, the most fed his link. because in that calm without words, Lucia found the certainty of being accompanied by someone who didn't need explanations for staying. One afternoon, while folded scraps in his deposit, Lucia found a box old with some belongings from the previous workshop. Among them was the notebook where made his first sketches, with coffee stains and borders wrinkled. Upon opening it, she found a design unfinished, one that had started just before his life exploded. He stood for a long time looking that leaf, like who finds a forgotten letter. He decided finish it, not out of nostalgia, but as an act symbolic of closure. It happened several weeks working in that dress, without telling anyone. She wore fabrics antiques, embroidery that Teresa gave him, lace left over from Sarah's collection. When he finished it, he hung it at the entrance of the workshop with a small sign that said, "For what could have been, and still, it could be." The customers looked at him curiously, but only Lucia knew the weight of each sewing. It was the last knot that remained by release. That dress hanging at the entrance of the workshop. Without looking for it, she turned around, kind of emblem. It was not in sale, but all they wanted touch it, know its history, understand his message. Some were excited when they read the sign, others simply, they smiled and continued. Lucia never explained too much. I just said, it's a memory I needed finish. And in a way, that was what she said there was made with his life. Finish what others had left incomplete, to give shape to what seemed a truncated, embroidered dignity in where before there was silence. Every time I looked at him, I remembered the Lucia who crossed that cathedral with its son in arms, not with anger, but with truth. And I understood that without that moment, nothing I had ever experienced now would exist. It was not about romanticizing the pain, but to recognize the power of decisions brave. Because that dress was not just a garment, it was a statement. Shortly after, he received an invitation that he left her in silence by several minutes. One university proposed to him, award him an honorary doctorate for his contribution to the community and empowerment feminine through art textile. Lucia hesitated and accepted it. I didn't have studies university students, and always there was sense that his road was more intuitive than academic. But Daniel reminded him of something. Don't are rewarding for a title, but for what you created with your hands, your history, and your heart. So he accepted. The ceremony was simple but emotional. She came on stage wearing a dress blue sailor, then she sang. There was sewn, unadorned, unpretentious. He gave a short speech, but powerful. What I learned is not in books. I learned it while I held my son with one hand and with the other kept my world from falling apart down. When ended, the applause. It was as long as silent, there was been his process. After receiving recognition, Lucia felt something she did not expect. A kind of deep relief, not because we'll need external validation, but because that act symbolic closed a stage. There was walked many years with the feeling of being rowing against the current, resisting, defending his place in he world. But now, finally, he felt he no longer had to prove anything, not to the others, not even to himself same. That gave him permission to do something that was postponing from toward time. Rest. Reduced your workload in the workshop, delegated responsibilities, and began to take Mondays as a personal day. Sometimes the eye used to sleep in, other times to go to the movies alone, to get lost in a museum, or simply walk aimlessly. It was his way to remind yourself that you were still there, being more than everything there was built, which followed being Lucia, the woman who also had the right to not do, to not give, to simply be. With that new freedom, also began to explore things that were there left aside, returned to write. Not with the intention of publishing, but as exercise intimate. He wrote about his days, about what he observed in others' women, about what she felt when she saw grow Nico. Sometimes they were just phrases loose, others times stories integers. Daniel, curious but respectful, never read without permission. One afternoon, however, Lucía let him on the table a small notebook with several texts marked. He read it in silence, and when he finished, he said, "This has to reach more people." Lucía smiled, but did not respond. She still did not know wanted to expose that part of itself, but something in she moved. Perhaps, she thought, she had arrived at time to count his history, not since he fact that marked her, but from everything that came after. Not like a victim, but as an author. Driven by Daniel's reaction and by some comments from close friends, Lucía began to sort out his writings. He reviewed notebooks old, notes in his cell phone, phrases, loose in napkins. All there was noted during the last year's charge now a new meaning. I didn't want write a biography, not a self-help book. I wanted count a true story, with its silences, its contradictions, and its moments of beauty unexpected. For several months, he worked at night after closing the workshop and putting Nico to bed. Sometimes he would get so excited that he had to get up to take air. Others, she laughed alone, remembering anecdotes minimal. I did it without pressure, without an editor, without haste. I just wrote, as if each word will help you put the pieces together, internal that still were left scattered. And in the end, when term he manuscript, he knew he was list. Not because it was perfect, but because it was true. He printed it at home on common sheets and bound it by hand, like the first catalogues that she made for her clients. She titled it, "Seams of a Life That Did Not Come Unstitched." He gave it to Daniel to read first, then to Sarah, then to Teresa. All they cried in different moments, not out of sadness, but by identification, because in each chapter there was something that resonated, something that hurt, something that healed. Then, without looking for it, the book began to circulate. A friend took him to a small independent publishing house, and this decided publish it without changing it a single comma. "Your text doesn't need corrections," they told him. "It needs to be read as it is." The launch was intimate, in his same courtyard as the new studio. Lucía read a fragment while held a book with trembling hands. When ended, there was silence. And then a woman in the audience stood up and said, "Thank you. Now I know I'm not alone." The publication of the book brought I get a new kind of recognition. It was no longer just Lucía the seamstress, the one from the workshop, the one from the conferences or the documentaries. Now Lucía was also the narrator. The woman who had known put in words what many others only managed feel. Book sales were modest, but constant. The important thing was not the quantity, but the quality of the reactions. Handwritten letters, emails, electronics, full of emotion. Women who arrived at the workshop with the book under the arm, wanting her to sign it. Some didn't say anything. They just hugged her. And Lucía understood all without the need for words. It was never felt famous. I wasn't even looking for it. But I was beginning to understand that her history had been converted in a mirror, in the one that many others could see themselves reflected. And in that reflection, find forces that believed losses. If you made it this far, please subscribe. This is the only way to maintain this live channel. One morning, while ordered books in the small workshop shelf, Nico entered running with a sheet of paper in her hand. "Mom, look what I wrote for school." It was a drafting about her favorite person. Lucía read in silence. "My favorite person is my mom, because she not only does clothes pretty, but also helps people when are sad. She doesn't use cape, but for me, it is a heroine." He felt that her heart sank. She bent down and hugged him, strong, and said to him, "You are my greatest creation." Because further beyond everything built, everything achieved, of each garment sewn or story told, he knew that this child was the greatest testimony of his path. A child who had grown amidst truths, care, and love. A child who, unknowingly, had been his anchor and its drive, his reason for not giving up never. As the months passed, they began to arrive invitations to present he book in other cities. Lucía accepted only a few, prioritizing places where could connect really with the readers. I preferred the spaces, small ones, the circles, intimate where possible, speak calmly, where people look into each other's eyes. In each presentation, they didn't just read fragments. They were also assembled conversations, spontaneous, where others women shared their stories. Some, they spoke by first time. Others, they cried in silence, just grateful to be heard. Lucía was not a therapist, nor intended to be so, but there was discovered something powerful in that act of sitting in circle and talk from the truth. Because when a woman dares to say, "me too," many others feel less alone. And that, in a world full of masks, it was an act of bravery huge. That's why continued, not for vanity, but by commitment. In one of those travels, during a chat in Valencia, an older woman approached him at the end. She handed him a photo, bent over and said to him, "You don't know me, but I met your mother." Lucía stayed paralyzed. Her mother had deceased when she was very young and knew very little of your life. The woman told him that they had worked together in a workshop in the years 70, which was quiet, observant and very good with her hands. Always he said that his daughter was going to do things big, though she couldn't see it. Lucía couldn't hold back the tears. It felt crossed by an emotion unexpected, like that part of his history that was always missing now had a part more. Saved the photo in his notebook, and that night, upon returning to the hotel, he wrote a letter to his mother, not to deliver, but to live a little longer inside it. That letter to his mother, written in ink blue in a folded sheet, it was not long, neither complicated. I was just saying what Lucía would have darling tell him during years, that it was fine, that there was cross things difficult, but there was left forward, that he had a son, wonderful, a noble companion and a workshop full of women who sewed dreams together. That many times it had been felt alone, but there was also uncovered his strength. What if in some corner of the universe could hear her? I hoped she was proud. Lucía kept it in an unaddressed envelope, such as symbol as promise. From that day on, he began to speak more about his mother in the talks, to name her in classes, to rescue his phrases loose, his gestures. I felt that, in some way, he was closing a circle. Not all wounds heal with answers. Some just need space, time and voice. Back in Madrid, he resumed his routines with more calm, with more presence. The workshop was running smoothly, equipment was solid, and the atmosphere continued being so warm as always. One afternoon, while Sarah was showing some sketches to new students, Lucía watched her from a distance and felt a surge of pride, silent, not only because of what Sarah had learned, but for what there was transformed. It was clear that she would soon be flying solo, and that it didn't make him sad. On the contrary, because if there was something learned Lucía in his way, was that letting go was also loving. That's why, when Sarah said timidly that he wanted to open his own space in another city, she hugged it strong and said to him, "Go, take everything you learned, and don't stop being you." He didn't give it to her tips technicians. He gave him something else valuable, trust, because in each woman who was leaving the workshop, Lucía left a seed that knew would germinate. The opening of Sarah's new space was cause for celebration for everyone in the team. Although was in another city, many, they traveled to accompany her at the opening. Lucía brought a small box with buttons, ancient, like symbol of continuity. Seeing it cut the ribbons surrounded by women who now would form part of his community, could not avoid get excited. Not because he felt protagonist, but because understood the value of seeing flourish to someone who one day arrived broken. It was the natural cycle of everything that existed sown, receive, heal, strengthen, and release. Back in Madrid, he trainee, Lucía thought in how many stories had passed already by his workshop, some brief, others intense, many anonymous, and all of them had left something. Sometimes a phrase, sometimes a look, sometimes a wound shared. It was like, his space was a large loom where all they contributed a thread, and that collective fabric became every day more strong. Shortly after, Daniel proposed to her an idea that at first seemed a madness. to make a long documentary about the history of the workshop, told by their own women who had it inhabited. No actresses, neither recreations, only real testimonies, images of the work daily, of the process of each one. At first, Lucía hesitated. She didn't like it, expose oneself too much, and less still ask to others who did it. But when spoke to him team, all they said yes, without hesitation. If this can inspire to someone more, it's worth it, Teresa said. So was born He Project. For months they recorded in flexible hours, without interruptions, he pace of the workshop. The interviews were intimate, careful, full of truth. Sometimes there were pauses long from the excitement. Others, bursts of laughter at the memory anecdotes. It wasn't a perfect audio-visual product, it was truth. And that's what ended by give it strength to the documentary. The premiere of the documentary took place in a small movie theater with free admission and capacity limited. No one expected it to fill up so quickly. Women of all ages, neighbors, journalists, former students, and even strangers who followed He Project through social networks. They occupied each seat. Lucía, sitting in the last row next to Daniel and Nico, he had his hands clasped together on the legs. When the screen turned on and the images began to be seen, first workshop plans, its heart was beating strongly. Throughout the screening, sounds could be heard: sobs, laughter restrained, and even applause spontaneous. Each testimony was a mirror, each image a window to a reality as human as it is universal. At the end, the silence was absolute. Then someone shout from He background, "Thank you for not giving up." And then yes, all of them, they applauded standing up, not for Lucía but by all. So that place there was meaning for so many. That night, when he got home, Nico asked him if it was felt happy. Lucía stayed thinking before answering. "I feel in peace," he said, finally, because that was what I felt. Not euphoria, not success, not fame, peace. There was delivered everything I had, from He heart, from the truth, and now I saw as each thread that there was sewn, literally or symbolically, was interlaced in something much further bigger than her. That recognition, silent, that collective hug without the need for contact, was more powerful than any prize. Daniel offered him a cup of tea, and as they sat down together in her sofa, she thought that perhaps that was the definition further requires happiness. To get home after giving it everything and feel complete, debt-free, internal, without masks, without earrings. Just her, Lucía, the one who didn't let herself delete, the one who wove his history with the threads than others they wanted cut. With the impact of the documentary arose new opportunities. Some television networks they wanted buy the rights to broadcast it at the national level, but Lucía was clearer. I didn't want her history became a consumer product massive. He agreed on one condition, that it be broadcast without cuts, without editing emotional, and that all the women who participated gave his consent written. The chain accepted, and on the night of the broadcast, millions of people in all He country, they learned the history of that Madrid workshop, where the seams were not just of fabric, but of the soul. In the morning, next, Lucía woke up with the phone full of messages, but did not open none immediately. He made himself a coffee, sat down on the terrace, and looked his sky. There was something beautiful in that calm down. I no longer needed run behind nothing. All I had in front of him was enough. He was, at last, hers. A few days later, he received a letter from Latin America. It was from a woman in Bogotá who had seen the documentary on the internet. He said that, after a separation, violent, there was lost confidence in everything. But seeing Lucía and the others, women, talk with so much serenity and dignity, he felt by first time, I could get back up. I don't have a workshop, nor fabrics, nor know how to sew, she said, but I have my hands, and I have time, and I want start. That letter moved her more than any award or recognition, because it reminded him he true purpose of everything, to touch a life, just one. And that was enough, Lucía wrote back. not knowing if would arrive, but he did it. With the same "be careful with which you sew a garment," stitch by stitch, with patience, with truth, in every word, she made clear what she always believed, that all woman, regardless where be, can return to begin. Who would you send a red string to today? Share it. But first, subscribe. Us allows continue spinning stories as this. From that letter, Lucía had an idea that seemed as simple as powerful. Create a women to women letter program. No social media, no texting, instant. Real letters, handwritten, with ink, with pauses, with silences. He called it "To I Write Because I Think," and it consisted in which each woman who passed by the workshop could write an anonymous letter of encouragement, which would be sent to other women in some place in the world that needed it. Within a few months, letters arrived from more than 15 countries. Some were brief, others extensive. Some were written in letters shaky, others with calligraphy impeccable. All they had something in common. One voice saying, "Me too, but I continue here." Lucía read some in silence, cried with others, and felt that this project there was open a new way of healing, between strangers, without judgment, with pure humanity. Success, unexpected from the program, led to a small publishing house to propose to you publish a book with a selection of those cards, respecting he anonymity and the original tone. Lucía accepted, but asked that each page included he, name of the country from where was written, like a map emotional that shows that pain, hope, and strength have no borders. The book was titled "Letters to Not Surrender," and became in a companion piece to many women in moments difficult. It did not offer solutions, but company, and that, for many, was enough. In the prologue, Lucía wrote, "There is no consolation further strong to know that someone, in some place in the world, you sees without seeing you, and yet, so wishes the best." That book was given in hospitals, shelters, schools, and with each exemplary, also traveled the message that there is no wound so deep that it cannot to be embroidered with true words. With the publication of Letters to Not Give Up, Lucía felt she had taken a step further. Beyond his personal history, the workshop continued working, the classes continued, the mentoring did not stop. But now there was something else big in movement. A silent network of women who accompanied each other without knowing each other, who shared bits of life through sheets of paper. It wasn't viral. It wasn't a trending topic. It was real, and that made it immense. One afternoon, while ordered boxes with new cards, Nico, already 13 years old, he asked her, Are you tired of talking about the past, Mum?" Lucía looked at him and smiled. "I don't talk about the past, son. I talk about what we did with it, because there was learned that wounds are not denied, nor are they displayed. They are transformed, and when they transform with purpose, they can become in path for others." A few months later, Lucía received a proposal for a university international. They wanted include his history and its methodology as case study in a chair of gender and resilience. At first, she felt out of place. "I'm just a seamstress," she thought. But the program coordinator answered her with something that disarmed her. "Exactly by that. Because what you have done with your workshop, your books and your letters is a form of pedagogy, from what I have experienced, and that has as much value as any theory. Accepted, participated in classes, virtual, shared experiences." He replied questions from students of different backgrounds, countries. He discovered, with surprise, that his history generated reflection also in young people who never had passed by a breakup or a loss, because, in his background, it was not about what there was lived, but how there was answered, and that, he understood, was what really inspired, not the wound, but the way to heal it. With the time, they began to invite her also to spaces mixed, where his history resonated not only in women, but also in men who had crossed losses, errors or transformations deep. Lucía, with the same serenity as always, He spoke from his experience without imposing conclusions, never pointed out guilty, never offered formulas magical. I was just telling as there was rebuilt his life from the everyday, from the possible. In one of those talks, a young man told him at the end, "Listening to you made me understand what to ask for. Forgiveness is not always enough, but change, yes." That phrase was left resonating in his head for days, not because it was new, but because condensed everything that she there was lived. Stephen had order, sorry, yes, but it was his own transformation that gave him peace, not an apology foreign. And now, seeing that even his history could wake up reflection in others, felt that their journey had still further sense. One morning, upon arriving at the workshop, he found a flower white about his sewing machine. It wasn't there signed. There was no note. Just the flower, fresh, simple, in silence. He asked the team, yeah, someone had it left, but all they denied with a smile accomplice. He thought that such once was a display of affection, anonymous, and placed it in a glass of water. Next to your notebook, that one gesture, minimal and mysterious, accompanied her all the day as a reminder that sometimes the essential does not need explain himself. In the afternoon, he found other flower, this time at the entrance. Then understood. Someone was leaving small signs, not to attract attention, but to embrace it from a distance. He did not look for the author. He did not ask more. He only received, because there was also learned that part of healing was to stop, distrusting good, and begin to receive it without guilt, with serene gratitude. As the days passed, the flowers continued appearing. Sometimes were wild daisies, others roses small, or sprigs of lavender wrapped in craft paper, always discreet, always unsigned. And although never discovered who was the person behind that ritual, Lucía began to incorporate it as part of his routine. Each flower new era placed in a glass jar about a shelf, and when the previous ones dried out, I used them to make small bookmark handcrafted items that she gave to her students. What was initially a gesture, enigmatic, became on an invisible bridge between her and someone who simply wanted to remind him that he deserved beauty, and that, for a woman who had rebuilt his world with your hands, it was a different way of being touched for life. Not since the pain, but from the delicate. One afternoon, while organized those bookmark for an event, it was realized that there was more than 100 flowers received, 100 gestures free, 100 silences that said, I am here. Then decided arm a exhibition with them. He titled it The Gestures That Sustain and presented it as part of a closing day of the cycle annual workshop. Each bookmark had a small date label in which there was received the flower, and in a wall to the side wrote in handwriting, Clara, I don't know who left them, but yeah, I know what they caused. They reminded me that the world can also be kind. During the exhibition, many women were excited to see how something so simple could have so much impact. And that was what Lucía was looking for from the beginning, that the simple, the human, the silent would once again be valuable. Because sometimes, flower in time, save more than 1,000 speeches. After the exhibition, they started arriving more flowers. This, instead of different people confessing have been touched for history. Some, they came with letters, others with drawings, and many with words like thank you, for show that simplicity also transforms. Lucía received them with humility, grateful, but without letting that distract her. There was learned not to get lost in the applause, neither in the mirrors. He continued sewing, teaching, listening. One afternoon, while Nico was helping her to organize the fabrics, he asked her, some time had imagined everything that would come after that interrupted wedding. Lucía smiled and said, never. I just knew I didn't want to disappear. And such time, he then thought about silence. That was always his true decision. Continue existing with dignity, even when he world had darling make it invisible. And since that existence firm, others also encouraged to appear. One morning, cold winter, received an envelope big from abroad. When he opened it, he found a formal invitation to attend a summit international about women leaders community in Oslo. The committee organizer there was read about her and wanted me to share his experience alongside others women from different parts of the world. Lucía stayed in silence for a long time, sitting at the kitchen table with the letter in his hand, not for fear but by vertigo. Traveling alone, talking in other language, represents so many stories. It was too much. But that night, while I was knitting with Nico a scarf to give away at Christmas, he told her something that made her decide. "Mom, if you don't go, many people won't know that it's possible. Go out forward." And then he knew. He wasn't going for ego, nor by recognition. I was going for all of which sometime they thought they couldn't more, and one day they could. The journey to Oslo went to experience transformative. Lucía, who never there, was leaving Spain. He found himself surrounded by women of different backgrounds, cultures, languages and contexts, all united by a same intention, to share as had converted the pain in the engine change. During its presentation, Lucía spoke slow, with his tone serene as always, recounting how a small workshop in Madrid had become converted in shelter, school and platform for many. It showed before and after photos afterward. He read fragments of letters, shared anecdotes about Sarah, about Teresa, about the dress that never sold. He did not speak as expert, but as witness. At the end, several women approached to hug her. One of them, Annie, Arabic language translator, told her, "In my country, your history can open doors that still are closed." And Lucía understood. A time more than his path already did not belong only to him. She was of many. When he returned home, everything seemed same, but different. The streets, the workshop, its kitchen, even he, sound of the sewing machine. Nothing was there changed, and yet she felt that something inside him had expanded. It wasn't grandeur, it was perspective. I had seen the world with different eyes, and now appreciated still further his little universe every day. It was allowed. A few days off, to be with Nico, with Daniel, with the workshop students. He shared travel photos, anecdotes fun, meals that they were tested, but about everything, shared something else subtle. The certainty that by no matter how far one goes, the true value is in not forgetting where you come from left. That same week, resumed the introductory workshops in sewing with new women, and looking at them, so different from each other, he felt what he always felt, that each one of them in silence. There was also disrupted some symbolic wedding, and now were ready to return to begin. Little time later, a publishing house proposed reissue her first book, but Lucía didn't want to simply relaunch it. He proposed the edition extended, with an epilogue where could tell what there was vivid from his publication. The letters, the documentary, the women's network, the journey to Oslo. Not to add achievements, but to show that reconstruction is not an endpoint, but a process in constant movement. In that new epilogue, he wrote a phrase that became iconic. "I'm not completely healed, and that's okay. I didn't come to prove that everything can be overcome. I came to say that even with cracks, you can do it." To flourish, the new edition was welcomed with enthusiasm. And soon they began to arrive messages from women who had read both books and felt that they accompanied their own processes as were chapters parallels of his life. Lucía did not respond with advice, but with gratitude, because I knew that the real accompaniment does not require anything, just presence. In a workshop session, while they talked about symbols, personal, one of the students' new ones, he asked what was the object that best represented his story. Lucía stayed thinking, and after a moment, he replied, "A thread thick, one of those that cannot be cut easy. Sometimes it gets tangled, sometimes it gets tense, but never breaks." Since then, he started giving away small threads reds to whom were ending his process in the workshop, wrapped in craft paper with a phrase, Let nothing extinguish you plot. It was a gesture symbolic but powerful. Some women wore it as bracelet, others hung it in their sewing machines, others kept it in the wallet, and all they coincided in the same. Each, every time they saw it, they remembered that they were not there alone. Lucía hadn't planned, but that thread term becoming in the workshop's new emblem, a reminder that each history, by broken as it is, it deserves continue weaving. With the time, the red thread began to travel farther than her. A client took it to Mexico and gave it as a gift in a rural community. Another took him to a rehabilitation center in Argentina. A nurse from Portugal asked 50 to distribute among his patients oncological. Lucía didn't understand how something so simple could tap so many lives, but he didn't question it. He just kept going, sending it, with love, with respect, without signature. For her, it was not marketing or campaign. It was an extension of its history, a way of being without being. Sometimes, when packing each thread, I thought in the woman who would receive him, in their silent struggle, in his possible reborn. And so, from a workshop in Madrid, he continued reaching places you never have before imagined, not as protagonist, but as bridge. Like who rail an invisible network where others they can to hold on without even get to know each other. One night, returning from a special day in tents, found Daniel in the kitchen, preparing his dinner favorite. Nico was in his room, listening music. Lucía took off the shoes, sat down on the table and breathed deep. How was? What's your day? He asked. Full, he replied her, of everything, of stories, of tears, of laughter, of life. And then, without much ceremony, Daniel took her hand and said, "You know I would marry with you any day, right?" Lucía looked at him with a mixture of tenderness and laughter. "Like this, without a ring, neither knees folded." He smiled. "So, just like we are." That night they didn't talk about the wedding, nor they did promises, but they shared a long, warm silence. The kind of silence that doesn't weigh, that accompanies. And in that silence, Lucía knew she was exactly where I had to be. Without suits whites, no cathedrals, no witnesses, just love, real, present, enough. In the morning next, while preparing coffee, Lucía thought in how many times there was dreamed of a life different, one in which there was no pain, nor deceptions, nor stumbles. But now, as I look his kitchen messy, the Nico's drawings on the fridge and the dried flowers in jars old, I understood that nothing would change. It did because all that, the good, the bad, the chaotic, had been part of the fabric that brought her there. She didn't live in a perfect story, but in a deeply his own. And that was what most valued. Sometimes thought in write a third book, one that didn't count his history, but that of the women who had it accompanied in the workshop. But I didn't know yet to start it. I knew that no matter what happened, I always there would be a needle close, a red thread, and someone willing to start over. That day, during a class with a group of teenagers, one of them, voice shy and big eyes, asked, "What if I fall other time?" Lucía knelt down forehead till she looked into her eyes and answered firmly, "Then you get back up, and if you can't do it alone, we hold together." The others girls, they nodded, and in that gesture silent, Lucía remembered again the power of the tribe, of that invisible fabric that united them. After the class, he handed over the threads reds as always, but with one smile further wide. Not because it was a special day, but because there was understood that every day was. Every conversation, every look, each word could be the beginning of something. And although not all were conscious, she was. She knew that since his little corner of the world continued spinning a lot more than seems, it was spinning odds. With the arrival of the anniversary number 10 of the workshop, Lucía decided organize something different. Not a party, not a formal event. I wanted a day out open where any could come in, have a tea, see the processes, chatting with the seamstresses, writing a letter, or simply feel in silence. They prepared a long table in the patio with fabrics recycled, buttons, antiques, paper, ink, and fresh flowers. Throughout the day, they entered women, men, teenagers, elderly women. Some knew the story, others they arrived by first time, attracted for the warmth that was breathed from the street. No one left empty-handed. Every visitor received a red thread and a phrase different handwritten. Lucía, between cups of tea and improvised hugs, felt that that day was a kind of mirror of your life, unpretentious, without spectacle, but full of meaning, a living space, human, real. As evening fell, an older woman approached slowly and stood observing the workshop's photo wall. He pointed out an old image and said, "That's me, it's 8 years. I arrived broken." Lucía recognized her right away. It was one of the first women who had encouraged to speak in voice high during a class. "And now, how are you?" he asked. "Healthy, not perfect, but standing." They hugged, in silence, without saying more. And in that hug, Lucía understood that it didn't matter how many awards, books, or documentaries came. The truly valuable continued being in those moments, a recognition quiet, one transformation that does not need stage. That night, at closing the workshop with Daniel and Nico, lit up a small candle at the entrance, like symbol, not to remember what was there lost, but to honor everything that, despite everything, there was accomplished build. From that anniversary onwards, Lucía began to write fragments, shorts in a notebook that he carried always with her. They were not long stories, nor letters. They were brief thoughts, almost whispers, inspired from what I heard daily in the workshop. A phrase said between laughs, a tear shared in silence, one transformation subtle but powerful. He called it Notebook of Things That Matter, and with it time became in a small fanzine that they gave away to new girl students. In its pages there was no theory, neither technique, just truth. Reflections as, not all wounds are seen, but all need careful. Or, sometimes it doesn't lack understand, just a company. Some women wore it always in the wallet, like amulet. Others left it in his nightstand, like reminder. And Lucía, seeing as those words traveled without her, she understood that her voice there was learned to walk alone. One day, when she returned from the market, she found Nico waiting for her at the door with a box in his hands. It arrived. "This is for you," he said. It was a package with no return address, but inside there was a handwritten letter and a small replica of his workshop made in miniature, with fabrics tiny, threads rolled up, one machine in miniature, and up to one figure of her sewing. The letter said, "Thank you for remind us that small things also transform." Lucía couldn't avoid cry, not because of the surprise, but because of the certainty that what there was built transcended the tangible. Because everything there was created, since he read thread to the workshop itself, it was a sum of gestures simple, repeated with love, without searching impact. And to see that someone, in some corner of the world, there was taken he time to recreate his world in miniature, was one of the largest forms of gratitude that I could receive. That gesture inspired her to organize a new activity in the workshop, the Week of the Small. During those days, women they shared the acts minimums that had meaning a lot in his process, a word they didn't forget, an object that accompanied them, a song that gave them strength. Each one brought something symbolic, and they placed it in a common table, creating a collective altar of the everyday. There was from cups broken repaired with glue to pieces of crumpled letters. Passing by, photos faded, buckles old and unmatched buttons. Lucía placed one of his first scissors with worn handle by the years. "This reminded me during a lot time, which still could create," he said. And as he looked at the table, filled with soulful objects, he understood that the great transformations not always are born of great gestures. Sometimes it is a scissors old woman who holds a life that refuses to give up. In the middle of that special week, Daniel proposed something that was not in their plans: to do a long break, take a year sabbatical. The workshop is strong, women, they can hold it, and you deserve rest without guilt, she said. Lucía resisted at first. How to let go of something that was there, sustained for so long? But then he thought in everything there was taught to others, that stopping is also an act of love, that the rest is not abandonment, but a right. So he accepted. He announced his decision with serenity and joy. He left entrusted to Sarah, who was returning for a while, already Teresa, who was now a guide for many. I will continue spinning, but from other place, he said as a farewell. And that phrase was left resonating in the courtyard like a soft echo, because Lucía didn't leave, she just changed places. As she does whoso, so that the plot doesn't break. Sometimes you have to start over from other corner. During the year sabbatical, Lucía traveled little and rested much. He didn't leave far neither. He changed cities. He discovered the beauty of slowness, breakfasts without a clock, walks by streets new, afternoons whole in bookstores, nights without an agenda. She returned to reading for pleasure, to sewing without orders, to writing without destination. He reconnected with parts of himself, same as they had left relegated among so many delivery to the others. Daniel accompanied her in that new rhythm, respecting its pauses, celebrating its discoveries. Nico, already as a teenager, he started calling her my mom, brave, when he introduced her to his friends. And that, more than any title, made it smile. Because I knew that his son, I didn't admire her by the books, nor by the documentaries, nor by the workshop. I admired her because he had seen her get up one and the other time, because there was learned from her that strength does not always scream. Sometimes just breathe deep and continues. On one of those leisurely days, Lucía revisited the Valladolid Cathedral, not out of nostalgia, but by close. He sat down in a bench, in silence, and observed the altar where, years back, his life there was changed forever. He didn't feel rage, no pain, just deep gratitude for having had he courage to interrupt that wedding, for not having silent, for having sustained by itself same when all it seemed collapse. He walked to the forehead, gently touched the edge of a column and whispered, "Thank you for not having arrested." As he left, he took a deep breath and felt further light. There was no turn back to look for nothing. There was come to confirm that there was nothing left pending, that what was once wound, now it was a scar. And that scar, I didn't mark it, I remembered it, because each thread that there was tissue after that day was born in part of that break. And he honored it. Back in Madrid, Lucía began to write what would be his last book, not an autobiography nor a guide, just a closing. He titled it What Remained, standing and structured it in short chapters, each dedicated to a woman who passed by the workshop and left a teaching. He did not use names real, but each history was wearing the intact soul, that of someone who returned to love after abandonment. She raised her children alone, without giving up. She healed a wound old, with a needle and thread. He also wrote about yes, same, but from other place, not from the pain, but since the maturity of having it transformed. The book was published without expectations commercials, and even so reached hundreds of readers. It was a kind of collective letter to all those who ever time they doubted their worth. I was there too, there, that I was not looking for console, but walk alongside. On the day of the launch, Lucía organized a reading intimate in the courtyard of the workshop, which is already I would come back to visit frequently. Sarah had taken her leadership with a serene strength, and Teresa continued being that calm beacon that accompanied the most new. Lucía read a chapter and then saved silence. "This book is my way of saying that I am ready to let go," she said. "Not to disappear, but to step aside and allow other voices to take over." At the end of the event, many women approached to thank you. Some with words, others with tears, others with just a look. and among them, one. The young man handed him a red thread. I couldn't find it. In a box. He passed it to me, a woman in a hospital, who said he came from you. Lucía closed eyes, excited, because understood, without needing explanation, that his history was no longer dependent on her, that she was still alive in other hands. They passed some weeks, and Lucía returned to her routines with a lightness new. I no longer felt the need to be in everything, to sustain it everything. I watched as the workshop continued working, how women they shared with each other, how he red thread had been converted in a tradition that none I wanted to break up. Sometimes participated in the classes as a student, learning new techniques, leaving teach for which she used to teach. This role reversal made her smile, because showed that the true leadership is not there in control, but in trust, in knowing when guide and when take a step back. One afternoon, as he left the workshop, he found himself facing a sky covered, but did not run. He walked slowly under the drizzle, letting the drops soak his coat. He felt that every drop was a closure, not of stage, but of debt. And for first time, he didn't have fear of the void. I knew I was full. Daniel was waiting for her with hot soup and a blanket. His sofa. Nico, now taller than her, he played the guitar in his room. Lucía settled in with a cup in his hands and looked at his around. Everything was in calm. There was nothing great going on, and yet it was one of those moments in which life was felt exactly in his place. Daniel came closer and whispered in her ear, "You are my home." And she, without needing to respond, leaned his head in his shoulder. There was past a decade from that tomorrow in which he took his son in arms and crossed a church. To interrupt a lie, 10 years of reconstruction, of sewing, of carefully woven words. Not everything was easy, not everything was right. But now, from that corner warm of his house, he could to say it calmly. It was worth it. Every stitch, every step, every silence. A few days later, he received an invitation to speak in a high school. It wasn't a big conference, not even an event international, just a meeting with students who read his history as part of a subject about resilience. Lucía accepted without hesitation. Upon arrival, she found a simple classroom with desks messy and looks curious. He did not take presentation, nor books, nor speeches prepared. He just sat down, crossed his legs and said, "I didn't come to tell you how to overcome everything. I come to tell you that even when something bothers you, you can decide that do with the parts that remain." During the talk, the youths, they asked simple things, but deep. One said to her, "What if I don't have anyone to help me up?" Lucía looked at him tenderly and replied, "Then begins by you, and look for someone who doesn't judge by fall." It was one of the talks further sincere of his life, and also one of the most necessary. That same one night, when he returned home, he found a letter in his mailbox. I didn't have one sender. Inside, there was only a phrase written in letters: "Great, thank you for not giving up. Thank you for exist." He did not know who sent it, but it didn't matter, because understood that in the end, his history, she was no longer just his. She belonged to all the women who had ever time were silenced, of all those who believed that their voice did not matter, of all those they collected the pieces and embroidered something new with them. He kept the letter next to the others he had accumulated in the years, not for vanity, but by memory, because each one reminded him by that there was started, and because, deep down, I knew that one day Nico or someone further would open that box and would understand that his mother was not famous by sew dresses. It was for not letting them break it completely, for continuing. With the passage of time, the name Lucía Fuerte is no longer just a signature in clothing labels. It became a reference, a symbol. But she continued being the same woman who, in his workshop, he stained his hands with. He made mistakes when cutting a fabric, laughed with her students, and cried in silence when some history touched her more than necessary. Never let herself be recognized for what he achieved, but by how he lived it. And although many they insisted in which I should open further headquarters, create a brand international, or accept proposals publishers ambitious, she was clear. I didn't come to climb, I came to hold. Hold looks, stories, beginnings. That's why, when someone asked him, was proud of her legacy, responded with a simple smile, my legacy is not me, it's them. Those who followed spinning when I dropped the needle. And so, in his silence of a life woven with truth, Lucía found what many they pass years searching for, meaning. Not through recognition nor perfect endings, but through coherence between what he lived, what he did, and what he chose continue making. His story. It started with a betrayal, yes, but never was about that. And it was about a woman who refused to disappear, who took her son of the hand, crossed a church full of lies and made itself seen. That after the scandal, instead of hiding, he embroidered future, which turned his pain in the workshop, his silence in word, his drop in impulse, and that in the end left a red thread in he world, one that other hands will follow weaving, without fear, with love, and with the certainty that all history, even the most broken, can return to. Begin. Snap History T moved. Subscribe now, because what we do here, you can only continue with you to the other side.